G'day, Brent.
G'day.
Good to see you.
Thank-
Today we are continuing our journey around the adaptive capacity index, and right now we're getting to this area called constructive behaviours, and I'm just hoping you can kind of give a bit of a where does this sit in the big picture of the ACI? How does it relate to the rest of the ACI?
So, the top right-hand quarter of the ACI is about what's individual and it's about what's tangible. And we've called that overall the behavior dimension. And so constructive behaviors is one of three subdimensions in that. And so it sits in an important place. It sits in a place that we would often start work with an organization or a team. We would start with behavior and prescription, the advice, the pushing towards you want more constructive behaviors and less of other kinds. In this case, aggressive or passive. But definitely there's a prescription towards this. This is fundamental to organization effectiveness. It's fundamental to adaptive capacity, and it's fundamental to a team's resilience. The presence and ongoing practice of constructive behavior really overemphasize that.
This word constructive behaviours, I think in general it sounds like I think I have an idea of it, but within the adaptive capacity it is quite specific too. And uh, I guess what I'm looking for here is like, okay, in general, what are these specific positive or these constructive behaviors that you're looking for in teams?
So look, overall human behavior, you can orient it in a couple different ways and you can define different kinds according to a few polarities or criteria. The major one for us to think about here is behavior oriented out of fear, or is it oriented out of aspiration or a desire for satisfaction? So are people moving away from and kind of freaked out by what they don't want or what they don't like or what they see as being dangerous, a threatened response? Or are they moving towards what they do want, an aspiration or a dream for a future state, or moving towards a satisfaction state? So those two are different ends of a polarity, and the constructive behaviors are the ones that aren't oriented about protecting yourself from something you're afraid of. So it's about satisfaction orientation. So that's the first part, I guess, of the definition. The second is there's a good balance between orienting around task or getting on with it, a kind of more individualistic approach versus people. And so there's a balance between focusing on the task and focusing on the relationships and the people. And it is spread across both. So it is largely defined as behaviors that move people towards what they want with a balance of focus on task and focus on people. So I guess the next level of definition, we've divided the constructive behaviors broadly into two halves. One we've called achievement and agency. The other we've called supporting and collaborating. And so that's the achievement and agency piece is meant to be kind of more the task orientation, and the supporting and collaborating is meant to be more the people orientation. And so when we define those, the achievement and agency piece we define as setting and achieving challenging goals, while also striving for personal growth and self-fulfillment. So in that case, individuals and teams are driven by a desire for excellence and continuous improvement. There's attention to standards, there's attention to value, and there's attention to just the mechanics of getting things done, effective planning, setting goals, getting organized, both self and other. The supporting and collaborating piece is more about creating a supportive and nurturing environment. That's where individuals get to feel valued and motivated. It promotes collaboration. It's all about collaboration, really. Requirements around this, around empathy, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, positive reinforcement, attending to the needs of others. Dan Siegel talks about mind sight, the being able to understand and get inside the experience of somebody else, attending to the strong and wanting to make strong and reinforce the relationships and sense of belonging. So there's kind of two sides to this coin. One side's more about task, one side's more about relationship and people.
So that's of particular interest to me. I think, it's very easy to become over-indexed on tasks, operations, getting things done, and not only just kind of forget about the relational part of things, but almost willingly blind to it, I think, right? Because it there's a job to be done. We need to execute. I do not have time to, pussyfoot around and worry about how you think or what you think. I mean, this is the job to be done. Can you please just get it together and do what needs to be done? Is there anything wrong with that kind of thinking? Am I?
Wow, where do we start? Look, I think the only thing really definitive to say about what's wrong with that is it doesn't work. So, I mean, by all means, go on, be a curmudgeon and be, antisocial and be all the things that you were describing and how you want to like just get on with it and disregard and bulldoze. But the problem is it doesn't work. So people have
Why
been
not?
trying that for a long time and things just don't get done.
Okay, why not?
Well, organizations are mostly people, and that's the bit that gets negatively hallucinated. It's the bit that people forget is that they're dealing with people, and everything that gets done is done with and through people. And so, if you have an undertaking that has more than one person in it, you have to attend to what's going on inside that other person because otherwise nothing will get done. Or what does get done is not going to be to your liking or specification. So, I mean, it's as simple as that. Every organization, and we tend to think of it as a thing, a building, a factory, a set of processes, but it's not. It's a bunch of people doing stuff. And so that's why. That's why it's important to attend to those people.
Okay, so if we start on this, the value of this relational element, how do you go about developing that skill set, or and potentially what are the things that get in the way of us building that skill set?
Look, the relational piece is interesting, mostly because it to really get good. I mean, some people are just good, and you could say, well, there's something genetic about it, and it probably is, but mostly, in my experience, it's about how we were raised. It's about the kind of childhood we had, and how secure we were in growing up. That tends to predict quite uh, significantly how you will continue to treat others in your adult life. It's where we form all of our values. It's where we form the assumptions we make about who we are in the world, what our place is, what our value is, what's likely to happen to us. That's where we set down all those big assumptions. And so our mindset, our background, tends to drive a lot of our behaviors. And so it's this piece where we say the first dimension, mindset, actually underpins the behavior dimension. And so if we want to get better at constructive behaviors, we probably will have to go and delve into, well, what sits underneath? What's the mindset? What are the values? What are the assumptions that sit underneath how I'm behaving? There are lots of behavioral training programs. There's lots of 360 feedback instruments that we use and other people use to give insight into, well, what are my behaviors and am I understanding myself correctly enough even to know what to do more of or less of. So there's many different things you can do to increase the amount of constructive behavior that you display, I suppose. I mean, it's kind of back to that old joke about the light bulb and the psychologist. It's, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? It's just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So
Mm.
it's the motivation piece, and because sometimes the patterns we get into in our behaviors can be pretty entrenched, and it can be there for a good reason. Like maybe our upbringing wasn't all that great and we learned a few hard lessons and we've stuck with it, and that's how the world works, and so get out of my way. And I mean, that's going to have predictable consequences. And to change that sort of underpinning, that's going to take some consistent and considerable work.
So, okay, if we look at sort of non-constructive, arguably destructive relational behaviors between people. Yeah, and I'm also thinking in an executive space. What are we looking for?
About the non-constructive,
Yeah,
the
like
more
how do maybe the absence of it, or perhaps that it's just
well,
not
this
being done
this
well.
this gets us into our other two subdimensions for this overall dimension. But we would talk about that as being aggressive defensive or passive defensive. So those kind of reactive, and again, they're mostly driven by fear. So we're looking at people who are either approval seeking, or they're looking to fit in too much, or they're avoidant of confrontation, or avoidant of speaking up, or getting into trouble. You might find people who are kind of more on the aggressive end of things, and they're going to be either fault finding, or they're going to be very domineering and demanding, or they're quite competitive or quite perfectionistic. And so those are the things we would look for that we don't want. And in some sense, the constructive behaviors, you can define them as the opposite of or the absence of the other. That's not all they are, but like it's quite difficult. For instance, if you one of the constructive behaviors we would talk about as being kind of the team player, someone who likes to be collaborative, who likes to cooperate, who gets joy out of kind of being that one amongst equals and belonging, being in the team, being in the tribe, being part of the family. Someone who wants to be that affiliation kind of character. Now, if you're big into domineering and being the boss and being the big heavy and you're always right and I know the right way and you're going to do this and I'm going to tell you, and well, that's kind of the opposite, like it's very difficult to do both of those things at the same time, to be a great team player and also to be really domineering. It would drive people a bit crazy. And so in that sense, you can define the constructive behaviors as kind of the opposite of some of the other ones, the more defensive or reactive oriented behaviors.
And if I look at if I look at something like the opposite of a lot of those passive behaviors, also what I'm hearing here is that constructive behaviors doesn't just mean being nice to each other.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the opposite, actually. I mean, there's a saying that I use a lot. It's like, well, constructive isn't nice. Uh, Nice is probably really kind of avoidant or approval seeking. It's probably one of those passive kind of approaches. If I'm going to be nice, then I'm probably not having the real conversation, let alone a confronting conversation. So, no, being constructive is not about being nice. It's not about being pleasant. It's not about being friends. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it's quite confronting. Mostly it's about being real, and mostly it's about being honest. And I mean, in a lot of organizations, people spend most of their time doing the opposite of that. They spend most of their time pretending and putting on a mask and playing the politics, and that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Um, there's that kind of, let's say, behavioral theatre, right? To
Yeah.
uh, to because look, coming up, it can be kind of aggressive. You're often your job's on the line, or there's ingrained behaviours, there's power and politics, there's reputation, there's a lot of pressure on the line, and people learn how to play the game to survive and keep their job, so to speak. But that at a certain point interferes with the effectiveness of people being able to tell the truth. And if you can't tell the truth, then you can't really make sense of the real problem that's in front of you. People are sweeping things under the table. There's low psychological safety. Suddenly there's a whole bunch of secrets and there's a whole lot of maneuvering going on in a room, as opposed to having a accurate flow of information and sense making going on between the group, so you can actually define what the problem is, so that you can have the best chance possible of being able to tackle it. So, on that note, what does good look like?
So, in terms of constructive behavior, I think there is balance. Balance is something, and being able to toggle between task and people. Like, you have to integrate it. You have to be able to do them together. Like, get on and get the task accomplished with people. But from time to time, the situation is going to demand, let's get on with the plan. Let's talk about the plan. I can't always talk about your feelings. But you need to be able to toggle between the two, know where you are, and have the attention to know kind of how much time you've spent in one or the other. So there's like a feedback loop that you need to create, and where that could be simply asking people, have we spent enough time here? Have we spent enough time there? What is, like that sense of, it's not necessarily performative. It's, you're going to be accomplishing this task with other people and in relation and through other people. And so being kind of, I think, open and transparent about the extent to which other people might know and you don't, the extent to which you're able to articulate how you're going to make a decision and whose decision it is and what the consequences are, and that you're upfront about the fact that you either care about how someone's dealing with something, and also while you still care, there's still a performance standard that hasn't been met. And we need to have that conversation, for instance. Do you know? It's like, it's not either I care about you and therefore we're not going to have this conversation about it didn't really work. In fact, this would say, by not having that conversation, you're demonstrating that you don't really care, because you're not actually trying to help them get over whatever it was that got in the way of them doing the thing in the first place. And look, and if they're in over their head and they can't actually do the task, while leaving them there is a really cruel thing to do. So again, like by being nice or kind of playing at this stuff in organizations and playing the politics and the games, we're not only not being constructive, we're only not having the right conversations, but we can be doing damage to people, even though we are sort of doing it with the best of intent. It's actually backfiring.
Yeah, I've heard analogies of the difference between being caring about someone and being nice to someone. The idea is that you being nice to someone isn't always caring about them or even being kind to them, if you know what I mean. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for somebody is to have unnice conversations. And to be honest, we'd expect that from our best friends. We'd expect that from our family members from time to time, to kind of pull us up on things, to stop us kidding ourselves. And the other thing that occurs to me as you were speaking there was that kind of instrumentalist approach, right? That kind of language. I've seen it, and I can assume it's not that uncommon. Is it, as you're coming out through an organisation and you've been through, let's say, the more operational levels inside of an organisation, it's very much about, here's the work to be done, here are the tasks to be done. And so it can get very instrumental in how you instruct people to do things and what is expected of them. But as you kind of move up through and you kind of switch into those much higher levels, things become a lot more strategic. They become a lot less unclear. You've got to triangulate people's perspectives. part of understanding people's perspectives is that yes, they'll have a rationale, but deep down under, usually rationales are post hoc rationalizations on actually some deep underneath stuff that's going on in terms of their emotional state, things that are bubbling up in their body, things that are not on the table to talk about. So, is part of that constructive behaviors about having those conversations to actually dig in on what's not on the table and to make the implicit, or to make the implicit explicit, or to make the hidden visible?
Yeah. Look, I think you've done there something that we want the ACI to be able to support, and it doesn't automatically do it. This is where the leader and the team need to make meaning of. But anyway, you've kind of hit on a couple parts of this at the same time. So as the level of complexity of the work increases, yes, things are more intangible. Things are less instrumental and clear. There isn't a manual. There isn't a right answer. And you do need to spend time and be skillful at asking the right questions, creating the relationships and the trust in order to find out perspectives and then craft a good decision, a good course of action to come through that. I would say that all of we broadly identify four, but all of the constructive behaviors would be involved in those higher level, more uncertain, more ambiguous situations, those more high complex problems to be solved situations. You would need to have a good achievement sense and skill set in your behavior to be able to articulate the problem, to get quite clear on what is the work to be done. You'd have to be quite clear about setting goals and boundaries and swim lanes for different people, whose decision is what and why is it that way. And so all of that work is very kind of achievement oriented. You're creating the plan, you're setting the scene, you're being organized, and you're helping other people get organized in their thinking as well as then the decisions they need to make. So certainly you'd need to have lots of that achievement orientation in order to be able to just navigate the complex situation and know what it is you're meant to be fixing. At the same time, you'd also have to be cooperative. You'd have to be collaborative. You'd need to be able to listen. You'd need to be able to reflect and process. You'd need to be a good team player. If you're inviting different perspectives, then you have to be able to make room for that, as opposed to a lot of what happens sometimes, which is, that people ask and then their eyes immediately glaze over, they nod and they go, thanks very much. And you were never heard. None of that is going to get it. It was just a political move. So not that. But if you're honestly seeking to coordinate perspectives and to, shift your own viewpoint because of what somebody else is saying and where they come from and their experience, well, that involves that collaborating and being able to create a cooperative environment. You also would need to have a strong sense of self, right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is kind of built into this. It was some of the theory work goes into it. There's a bunch of other psychological researchers and theorists whose work sits underneath this. But, his hierarchy of needs says self-actualizing is the pinnacle. Was once you get your basic physical needs and your relational needs and your security needs met, then you can start to create, well, what is the purpose I want to have? What is the meaning I want to make? What is the impact I want to do in the world? Why am I here? And so that kind of, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to be confident. I'm going to be able to put my position. I'm not going to be too worried about what other people are doing, what they're saying. I'm not going to resile from stating. So you contribute fully. You don't withhold. You don't stay back. You don't avoid. So that behavior would be necessary, that kind of, I'm going to fully show up. I'm going to fully contribute. I'm going to present all of myself in this conversation. I mean, and finally, then the creation of a supportive environment, one where you're you're looking to develop other people. You're looking to help them get to their potential. You're looking to create trust. You're looking to create a supportive, a nurturing environment where, well, people can have some fun and where people can do good work and where people can get having some joy and to show up. And we're not a machine and we're not a cog, and this isn't just about the money, and there is some possibility for humanity in all of this, and that is explicitly recognized, and that can be as simple as a smile and a care and a laughter in someone's eyes and sort of making a joke and being in relation and knowing, oh, there's another human being here and I actually give a shit. So I think there's all of those, that whole kind of spectrum of behavior is what is needed for a team to be resilient, for a team to be able to figure out higher complexity problems, disruptions, things that are coming at them. If they can't do those four kinds of things, those constructive behaviors, they're going to be in a world of hurt because people won't show up. They won't be sharing their ideas. They won't be telling the truth. They won't be getting organized. That's not resilience. That's not adaptive capacity.
So I love that bit you said about play. It just reminds me of, it's so hard for people to be innovative unless there's that sense of playfulness, right? Because it is that freedom to fail. It's, and it can be a serious game. Like it doesn't, like a game of rugby or a game of, this is playing, but it's serious, it's intense, and it can be highly competitive. But there is this sense of having a go, leaning in, and I think that opens up people's thinking and their I guess their motivation to actually have a go at something and have a try. So one thing then, I guess maybe just to kind of head towards the finish line on this is that you've done this for a long time. You've done the whole ACI, the whole 360 on this, right? Mindset and behaviors and culture and systems. But I'm interested in this behavior part because that thing that you talked about in terms of people being quite instrumental, I've seen that so often. I've been a part of that. I'd actually been that person at times. I think hopefully I'm recovering. The question then becomes like, I mean, do you have stories to tell? Do you have experiences over time where you've had these people who kind of were in that, let's say that more instrumental or those non-constructive, and you're able to actually get them around to this more constructive behavior? What did that look like, and what happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, there's a bunch of people that I am thinking about, and maybe the story is going to be an amalgam to protect the guilty and innocent. The thing that occurs to me listening to your question, there's that mask that we get handed either implicitly or explicitly about what does professional look like. And if I want to be worthwhile, if I want to be taken seriously, if I want to get the next job, if I want to, get ahead, who do I need to be in order to be acceptable? And so there's a masking, there's a costume, there's a bunch of that is at play. And I think what I would say is the people I've worked with have been largely driven around that. So in that more instrumental and kind of tasky approach, the kind of it's about getting on with it, and let's get on with it, and we have to fix it, and it's all about it. And so there's two things that drive those people I've found. One is a fear of failure, and the other is a fear of getting it wrong. And both of those would have kind of unarticulated but disastrous consequences. And so again, back to what we were talking about earlier, to get that change, that shift from the instrumental behaviors of always looking at ranking and always looking at how am I compared to so and so, and am I good enough here, or Is this up to scruff? Is this going to be okay? Am I going to be judged? This is not good enough. Am I not good enough? People who've gotten away from that way of thinking have looked at those bits of themselves that sits underneath, again, the mindset, their immunity to change, the patterns they get stuck in, and they've revealed to themselves the ways that they get themselves stuck, the ways that they can scare themselves. They reveal to themselves, this is what I think is really going on in life. And so that's why I behave like this, is because if I don't win, I'll never be loved. And so people suddenly have this realization of, oh, that's why I've been doing what I've been doing. And they get to have the experience of testing those parts of themselves. They get to have a look and say, is this actually true? And of course, in most cases, it's not quite true. It's a belief that maybe got laid down a long time ago, maybe for very good reasons then, but not necessarily relevant now. And so it's the grow up to show up bit, right? So the grow up is look at yourself, examine those bits of yourself, resolve some of those places where I get stuck, repair, fix some things so that I can behave different, so I can show up, so I can be constructive and not tied to or caught in some of these other defensive or reactive routines. So how did people change? How did they get away from some of those more instrumental bits? They had a look at the underlying beliefs and values and stories they were telling themselves. That's how they did it.
And what does that look like at a team level then? If you get a whole bunch of these people who kind of go through that journey, they talk with their shadow, they come to some potentially hard realizations about how they grew up, or perhaps these stories that were laid down that flowed through their life and manifest as an adult, and they have to wake up at 52 and go, dear God, I've been running on this same routine since I was a kid. I just got really elaborate cover stories. Cool. That's at the individual level. But if you can get a whole bunch of those people, and I'm guessing it takes quite a few months to kind of do that process, maybe even up to a year or more. But people go through that process, and then what does it look like when you've got a bunch of people on that exec team who are operating from that level of, let's say, self-awareness, a degree of authenticity, a bit of vulnerability there as well. And as you say, like there's that ownership, right? You're stepping up to, you're growing up and showing up. What does that look like at a collective level?
Well, what it has looked like and what it does look like is that those people make some explicit agreements with each other about how they will and won't behave. And often those things are couched in language like the constructive behaviors and not the aggressive and or defensive behaviors. And they have a conversation, an ongoing one, and they say, well, we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. And then they call each other on it, either in the moment and or at some kind of regular frequency. They call each other on and go, that thing? We said we weren't going to do that, and you did. And that's part of the social contract that they set up with each other, is like, we're going to keep each other honest. We're going to have the real conversation about shit that goes wrong. So that's one thing. But I think a more kind of powerful and profound thing that stimulates and supports constructive behaviors particularly, but also more generally that adaptive capacity, is people contract with each other either individually, maybe a one-on-one thing, or it could be to the entire team. It's like, look, this is my pattern. This is what I'm likely to do. I'm likely under pressure to go like this, to get really pedantic, to get very competitive, to withdraw and go judgmental, or whatever it is. And when you see me do that, I need you to interrupt me. I need you to say, hey, are you doing that thing that you do again? Like anybody in a good marriage would do. Like anybody who actually loved each other would do for each other. they'd say, "Hi, honey, don't tell that story again." It's like it's the same level of connection and contact. It's like we're making a bond with each other, and we're gonna make each other excellent. We're going to support each other to be the best. I hate it. I hate this phrase, the best version of ourselves. But we're going to support each other to grow, and we're going to support each other to be honest and to show up and sometimes we're going to fail. And when I fall, will you pick me up?
It's funny you mentioned that marriage counselling. I was listening just recently. I think it was Mark Anderson. He's he's a large VC boss, right, from Silicon Valley, big giant in the tech industry. And he was just saying that they invest in hundreds of startups, tech startups, knowing that most of them will fail. But he's saying, after doing it for just decades now, he's just saying that, most startups, no matter how much they love each other, those partners who are close, most of them die by suicide, not by homicide. And what he means by that is it's the internal relationships within the people inside of that company as it grows. If things go tough and they go bad, or if they go really good and there's a lot of success and a lot of money, it is the interrelationships of those people at the top in that organization that are tested and broken. And so his suggestion was that there's a real market there for basically marriage counseling, but for startup founders and or execs in that space. And it's kind of, I heard that and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because that's basically what we do, at least part of what we do, right? It is interesting to see, and I guess it goes back to what you were saying before about that balance between, let's say, relational and instrumental, or the objective, right? We overemphasize and overindex. Like, if we get the systems right, if we get the technology right, everything's going to be okay. The rest will sort itself out. But time and time again, you look across all of these businesses, and whether it's the exec team or you even ask people inside of companies when they fall apart or why they quit, listen, they might complain a little bit about the tech computers, but really what they complain about, if you really boil it down, it's something about, I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was valued. The culture was toxic. We couldn't get things done. The problematic personalities. We just didn't get along. It goes on and on. That we love to think that we live in this technological world, that it's about technology and the technology is going to save our business or take us forwards. But actually, in the post-mortem, it's overwhelmingly relational.
Well, when you were talking about the VC guy, I was thinking about a company that we were talking to recently, and the story was there's lots of stuff going on, transformation programs, acquisitions, mergers. There's lots of stuff going on. When it came down to it, it actually was dysfunctions and lack of constructive behaviors amongst the executive team that was getting in the way. And they weren't having the right conversations about the bits that were either working or not working, or we're going ahead, or we're not getting funded, or the styles that they had used, the non-constructive styles of constructive behaviors, was the bit that was going to sink the company, was going to materially impact their effectiveness and delivery. And again, large sums of money, many people's jobs. And yet it was, this group of 8 or 10 people who, and the part that was really interesting was, and they didn't know it. They would deny it. They would say, no, we're fine. It's them. It's the system. It's the implementation. It's other people. It's they. And so there's a real reluctance. In fact, you'd say an active working against senior teams recognizing their own dysfunction in themselves. And yet everybody else kind of knows that that's where a lot of the rot sort of sits. And so there's, and you alluded to it earlier, when people get to these more senior roles, they've got this far in life. They've either got there quickly or they've taken a long time. But either way, there's plenty of evidence of, I'm pretty good. There's plenty of evidence of, I know how to do this and I'm doing it well because look at me, I'm a success. So it becomes a bit of your buy your own bullshit sort of story. It's a little bit of, there's a trap that sits there, and it can be difficult for people to want to look at that and not see, in fact, that it's everybody else that has the problem and I'm okay. So, I mean, I think that that's another precursor to anything meaningfully happening in this regard is people have to be humble. They have to be willing to see themselves warts and all, and they have to be open to the possibility that they might not have everything quite sorted.
And, that's kind of what I really am impressed by with the ACI is that instead of actually trying to show what the objective truth is and what are the systems and what's actually going on out there, ultimately what we're talking about here is it's people's subjective experiences, their own personal perceptions about how everything else is going and what other people are doing. Is that stuff is baked in. It's extremely powerful, but we tend to avoid it because, well, it's subjective and it's too hard. We can't get our heads around that. But actually, if you think about it, whether it's think about how many marriages go down the drain, or how many relationships, or how many businesses, or how many exec teams, and all these dysfunctions. If you really looked at it, it's so much of it comes down to the interpersonal, the subjective perceptions we have, and the lack of alignment, right? Like we're all just running on all these assumptions about how things are, and actually I'm good at this and people like me, or I'm terrible. And the reality is often vastly different. And it's not to say right or wrong, but you're going to need some degree of, I guess, truth telling to a degree, truths telling, for lack of a better word, to get some alignment on this so you can at least even be on the same page. Because otherwise you're just running on a whole bunch of assumptions about how things are, not how they actually are, if you know what I mean, the actual relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bias in many businesses these days about being data driven, and to be modern, you must be data driven and be all analytics, and it's all about the machine, and it's all about the facts, and it's all about data, and it's not, and it never has been. So that's not to say that that stuff isn't important, and it's you need to measure, and sure, and got it, but that's not everything. And you're right. There's a great temptation out there to look for this kind of data driven thing and not pay attention to, and how are we making meaning of that data? What's the story we're going to tell ourselves? And is that the right story? Is it a wrong story? Is it a useful story? Is it a generative story? Is it taking us in the right direction? So that power of narrative and being able to have the sophistication of mind to reflect on how am I and how are we making meaning of the things that are coming at us is really what the ACI is about, because that is adaptive capacity. All of the systems thinking piece around self-organization, it's how well is the system connected to itself, and how is it adapting, how is it self-organizing in response to what's going on around it. That is a resilient system. Having the truth is not necessarily the answer here. It's what do you do with it? What do you do with the truth, and how do you process it? That's what's more important.
I love what you said there about how well connected something is to itself, because I kind of, if I look at it like the metaphor of a body, of a human body, right? The When information breaks down, let's say something like MS or some kind of neurological disorder, what happens is that the information flows become impacted. You're getting short circuits, you're getting wrong messages. You're not responding to the fire or the pain or the threat, or you're not seizing the opportunity, or you're not. And basically, this is how I see any of these things that interfere with honest observation and sensing of the environment around you, and then responding to said environment, and then learning from, and hopefully then anticipating said environment. that is essentially what we're talking about here. It's kind of like they're kind of like um, organizational neurological problems. That's kind of how I see this
Yeah.
breakdown, right?
Well, look, and again, another metaphor we use is kind of, we're there to construct the bigger brain. The the whole mix and mess of stuff that is what businesses and teams, executive teams, need to be dealing with. All of the VUCA disruption, blah blah. No one person can get across all of that. You have to connect people together in order to create a larger intelligence, which is the team, which is the executive team that is organizing. That is the whole point. We make a bigger brain. Yes, there's the MS neurological breakdown, absolutely, in an individual, and we see organizational breakdown when there are silos, when there's animosity, when there's lack of relationship, when there's too much instrumentality. People aren't connected to each other, bad decisions get made.
Well, I think maybe that's a good place to end it. I feel like we've covered off on the key ideas here. Is there anything else here that you'd like to add?
Look, this is one thing that occurred to me just towards the end here. One of the ways that we work with organizations and teams, both individuals as well as the whole team, and one of the powers of the whole behavior dimension is the language of human behavior, and the incredible power of an executive team who knows how to call things and that are aligned around the words they use to describe human behaviors, the words they use with each other, and then out into the rest of the organization about what's okay and what's not okay. And being very clear about those things, not ambiguous, not fluffy, being very clear and being consistent, one person to the next, about how they understand that and how they talk about it and how they communicate about what they want in the organization at large. Because what this whole behavior quadrant does is it gives executive teams a language to then use to drive culture, to then use to address relationship issues, to use to make teams and working groups more effective with each other and between them across the organization as a whole, that cross-functional working. And so being able to define and describe coherently what good looks like is an incredible asset that executive teams get when they work on this behavior dimension.
All right. Well, thanks for that. Um, we can leave it there, and I'll let you get on with your day.
All right.
All right. We can tackle another quadrant and another subdimension another day.
All right. All good.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ant.